You are listening to the 19th broadcast of TBR Radio's The TBR History Hour, with your host, TBR contributing editor, Dr. Edward DeVries. In today's show, Dr. Ed calls TBR executive editor Paul Angel. Ed and Paul discuss the ongoing coronavirus situation as they talk about the articles in the newly released May-June issue of the Barnes Review magazine.
Asked the question at the very beginning of the magazine, do we really need China?
What do you think?
Well, honestly, I think we don't. That if this whole crisis, if you will, works the way it should, is we can totally eliminate China from any relationship at all with the United States. Because right now, we don't need to be bringing in half of our food from China. We don't need to be bringing in, a great amount of our pharmaceuticals and medical supplies from China. If I had any say in it, we would stop buying medical supplies from China. We would stop importing food from China. If anything, if we can do this right in response to this crisis, we can bring our manufacturing basis and our jobs and everything back home. Of course, we all know that the leaders of this country aren't either that smart or that, they don't have the country's best interest at heart. So either way, it's never going to happen. But that's the way it should happen.
You're exactly right. In the midst of this terrible, scary pandemic, as the media frightens everybody, and we think that, globalism, they're trying to convince us that the only way to move forward is with a global effort, which is to some extent true. The real story is we do have great opportunity here for the United States, and as far as nationalism and bringing these subjects to the forefront, particularly the control of our food supply. I said to my wife the other day, as she pointed out to me, that 90% of our apple juice comes from China. Okay, and I look for the brands, and I don't want Chinese apple juice. I don't want shrimp farmed over top of fish farms where they're feeding the shrimp or eating the fish poop, right? I don't want that. I don't want my beef to come from Namibia. We have it here. There's no reason why we can't have it here. People will say it costs a little more, but it's going to be so much better. But that is one thing, is certainly absolutely our food we should have control over. And our pharmaceuticals, 90% or 95% of our antibiotics are made in China. And we know that besides the globalists propping up China. Here, Bernie Sanders was sitting there saying, wow, China is great. They have lifted more people out of poverty than any country in the history of the globe. Are you kidding me? They didn't do it. We did it. We did it by setting these factories over there. We did it by wanting cheaper water guns and, Nerf balls and Christmas tree ornaments, all the stuff we really don't need that people could make here. I don't know how much profit they're going to make if they get their way to pay them $15 an hour to make Christmas balls. But the fact of the matter is we don't need half of this stuff anyway. We are just the biggest spoiled nation in the world. And when something like this COVID-19 comes along, really it's a SARS, right? It's a severe acute respiratory syndrome, but I guess COVID-19 is what you get from it. But people need to, and they're out of work, they have to realize that there's tons of stuff they can do here. But you're 100% right. I don't think we need China, but the question is, do we really need India? Do we really need every time you call about a computer problem, you have to go to India?
You realize that the India economy has actually grown by over 10% during the midst of the coronavirus, and the premier, whatever they call them over there in India, had actually reported to the BBC that the economy in India, the gross national product of India, is going to grow considerably, not just in spite of the crisis, but because of it, so that they're going to thrive when everybody else is collapsing.
Isn't it interesting that the minute nationalism rises as well? So there's two sides, obviously, here fighting, right? Nationalism versus internationalism. Of course, Willis Carto, the founder of the Barnes Review, always said that this was the eternal struggle. Populism versus Plutocracy, the name of his famous book. And you look around Europe, of course, in this hit, Boris Johnson was emerging as a nationalist leader, right? The leader of India is extremely nationalist. Hungary, France, multiple other nations, Italy, right? We're starting to emerge, and all of a sudden this pandemic hits, whether planned or not, or who's behind it or whatever. I think more or less that groups are better, internationalist groups with large amounts of money are better able to take advantage of chaos. That chaos can either be caused by them, or they just use their news media to manipulate minds to become afraid. I see people are scared in this country right now. But yeah, I can't believe India's, I don't want to get off the subject, but I can't believe India's economy is rising. I would have thought that they would have had a massive infection, but hey, there's different approaches to it too. I don't know what approach they're taking if they're locking down people over there. I know right now, I've seen a lot of news reports recently that the Sweden approach has already been proven, even though they have 10 times the number of deaths from this influenza or whatever it is, this viral infection. I hear so much stuff. I'm so confused. There's so many reports coming in about viruses are good for you. Viruses don't kill. There's no such thing as COVID-19 and all this other stuff. I don't really know. I just know that people are getting old people are getting sick, and they're usually getting like pneumonia and stuff. They can't breathe. That's the severe acute respiratory syndrome. But yeah, it's surprising that how scared the news media has tried to get people. I see people are now protesting doctors' houses in different states. In Ohio, this particular one was where they're out front. She's the one who advises the governor. Dr. Fauci's coming under criticism, which he really should, because if you look at his past, he has a questionable past as far as his advancement of his own career and profits and investing in different drug treatments, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a real complicated situation. But I'll say it comes down to this stuff. The news media creates fear. And in the end, I think that this is a great opportunity for nationalists around the world to make themselves as self-sufficient as possible. If you can feed your own people, and which puts you a great advantage when you have one of these global pandemics. That's the thing that people are afraid the most about, that and toilet paper. Who would have thought, right, that toilet paper would be the one thing that would be off the shelves. But I go to the grocery store here, and of course, all the beef is gone, except for the expensive steaks, because those things are expensive as heck now. Chicken's gone.
I went to a restaurant the other day because they posted something on Facebook, and my wife saw it, and apparently their restaurant's been closed for a long time, and they tried to offer takeout, but people weren't coming in and doing the takeout. And now they've got all this meat on the, in the freezers and in their coolers and so forth. And they also have more food that's coming in because, they had planned their deliveries for however far in advance. They want to stay in business. They want to make money. So they've converted their restaurant into a grocery store.
That's a great idea.
And I paid $60 for a 10-pound strip of filet mignon, and all I have to do is cut the individual steaks out of it.
Well, sounds like a good deal. I haven't had filet mignon in a long time.
Yeah.
But back to China, I will say that, and we can wrap that up. But, I saw a very interesting report from a China expert who says this might be the end of China's bid to be a superpower. Now, one of the avenues of investigation here is how we're going to use this in China. Should we punish China? Did China do it on purpose? Did they not do it on purpose? Is this just some part of a bigger plan to knock China off its pedestal? Well, honestly, I don't really care about all that. What I care about is the fact that China has control over too much of our products and too many of our industries, and too many jobs have been taken away. And it just doesn't make any sense. Whoever decided the United States particularly, should turn China into a superpower ought to be taken out, put in prison. But his point was that China is a lot more fragile than you think, and that they knew this was coming sooner or later. The West would catch up to the idea that you can't ship all your jobs and your factories overseas, and can't put your pharmaceuticals in the hands of a country that they're packed so tight together in some places, living in unsanitary conditions, and conditions which are probably appalling to some degree. Although they also are quite advanced. This Belt and Road project that they had going was pretty amazing. But we financed it all. And it's time to rethink this new world order. It's been some time, for quite a while, but we could have a nationalist new order where we all cooperate. Nationalism, they like to portray it as a warlike movement. It doesn't have to be. And just work together with other nations, trade with them, get along with other nations, as George Washington said, trade with all. And have no.
Put it in perspective. Who says that neighbors can't get along, or who says that neighbors have to fight?
And they don't also have their own best interests at heart. But you can also have your neighbor's best interests at heart as far as a community. So, yeah, I don't know who came up with this idea, obviously, particularly, but it's time for it to be rethought completely. And this is a chance for our own new world order. A new world order where nations worry about themselves, but they worry about their common security, and they trade peacefully with their neighbors, and to stop trying to overthrow governments, as we're seeing here in Venezuela. Instead of trying to punish the Venezuelans, try to help their economy. We don't like their leader, but don't make the people suffer. And I think we know this. The United States as a nation has lost its way a long time ago as far as this goes.
And so what I'm starting to see is talk even amongst people who I would have called, globalists. And you're talking about, there's a chance for a new nationalist world order. I wonder if some of them don't see that or realize that, because even amongst some people who I would consider globalists now, I'm hearing talk about, hey, we just need to cut China off.
Yes, I believe so. And the point of this man's lecture on China was that it's much more fragile than we thought, but they knew this was coming. And over the past several years, they've been consolidating power. And I don't know what's going to happen there. But look, one day we woke up and the Soviet Union was gone, and it didn't take very long. So who knows what's going to happen with China? If China decided to have a more, I hate to say humanitarian approach to its own people, a more open press, although to think that our news media would get in there and twist them even worse than they're being twisted now. But the fact of the matter is, China could be a great ally for somebody in the future if were they to dump this totalitarian state that they currently have. And we can trade with them, and we can I guess they can provide some products for us that we can't get for ourselves. But generally speaking, this is a one-sided relationship that must end. And it could, and this man's point, now other people completely disagree, but they say that China could tumble very quickly if nations start pulling out their manufacturing. Japan, for instance, has already started pulling out some of their factories and other things. And I just don't want to see this turn into the United States bullying China. I see that we're doing a lot more. Warships are passing in the South China Sea. And of course, China has been doing its own militarization in that region with the creation of its bogus islands to extend its territorial waters and to take charge of that whole area. But when we talk about getting into a war with China, well, then we've gone too far. That's not the way we want to proceed with this. And I don't think we should meddle as we have done in Iran with our Facebook projects to create green revolutions and overthrow governments we don't like. I just think really we should try to make life better for the people of these nations, and that creates much more friendly attitude towards America than does the process of bellicose actions that we've taken over the past 50 years. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be very interesting what has happened. We all are worried that we're going to lose jobs and lose homes, and many people already have. We don't know where $3 trillion comes from. I saw that Mnuchin says he's going to borrow up to $3 trillion from the Federal Reserve. And of course, we know this is not the way the Constitution is supposed to work as far as minting money and controlling money and paying interest on humongous loans that can never be repaid. And then pay interest on it to these independent bankers, this privately owned gaggle of bankers that runs the world. So everything needs to be rethought. It's not going to work if you don't have some sound money and some sound financial policy. And so who does this all benefit in the end? Well, right now it looks like the American public, a great portion of them are going to go into massive debt. Whether or not they're getting loans or money and they think that they don't have to pay them back, I don't really know. How long people want to be on unemployment, how long people can be on unemployment, how long you can just keep printing up the money and paying it out, and then and the only victor in this thing is those who are collecting the usury off of these massive loans. I don't think we're ever going to have a balanced budget again. It wasn't possible even now with the amount of money they're spending. But $3 trillion is so much money that it's almost incomprehensible. We'll see what happens. But China could, the point was that China could tumble faster than we think or not. You don't really know. But I would say if a lot of nations start to pull out their manufacturing and you see some unrest in China itself, that could lead to some type of a groundswell against a change in their form of government.
Open your web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
Well, I almost wonder if China is not the new Germany. And the reason I say that is if you study World War II, and I know you have, the Western powers, the people who we would have considered globalist in the early 20th century, they built Adolf Hitler up, they built National Socialism up, they built Germany up. The Fords and the Rockefellers and the Chase Manhattan Banks, they basically built Germany. And they did that so that Germany could, to some degree, weaken the rest of the world. And then when Germany had done everything they needed Germany to do, they pulled the rug right out from under Hitler, and then, of course, they destroyed Germany because he wasn't really a part of what they were doing. And are they not doing the same thing with China? They build up China at the expense of all of the other countries of the world that they do control, just so that now they can basically pull the rug out from under China, and by destroying everything, they now control everything.
I don't know. It is so complicated. Everything in this, every one of the aspects of this pandemic, from the health to the media to the finances, is so interwoven and so complicated. I don't think anybody can control it or predict what's going to happen. I just know that certain people thrive on chaos. And this is a situation of chaos. And where the rest of us see chaos as a threat, they see chaos as an opportunity.
Right.
So who knows how this is all going to play out? I just know that it looks to me like debt is the new profit for these groups. And first we had the bubble in the tech market, then we had the bubble in the housing market, then we had a bubble in the mortgage thing. Then all of a sudden we have a debt bubble, and this debt bubble, as first they've wiped out portions of the stock market. The stock market in 1929. The crash of the stock market didn't necessarily affect the average guy to some degree. It was only 1% of the American public that was invested in the stock market. Now we all are invested through 401ks and our own little stock plans, whatever you have. Kids' college funds are tied to this stuff. So wiping that out hurts. But I do know that fear is their weapon. And that's where the news media comes in. That kind of takes us into our editorial there about the news media's role in all this and who controls the news media and the message that we get. It's absolutely amazing watching the news media. They are just arms of the Republican Democratic Party, Fox to some degree. I think there's, I hate to say any of them are good, but there's always good congressmen that are not all crooks. And there's also a couple good reporters, but Tucker Carlson seems to be one of the few reporters who actually is willing to criticize President Trump when he's wrong and praise him when he's right. But the difference in the coverage is absolutely shocking. I saw the other day, of course, we're going to approach some massive number of unemployed, right? And so, of course, the reporting on the stock market crashes. And then, of course, April, one of the best months ever in stock market history because it went up some amazing amount of money, number of points, right? And so I imagine that we're going to hit like a 20% unemployment rate in this country. And one news media will be saying after, I'm hoping that a lot of these jobs are going to come back. It's not like 1929 when there wasn't any jobs. A lot of these jobs should be waiting for people if they ever get this service industry back. Obviously, 70% of our economy is based on service industry, nurses, bedpan emptiers, waiters, waitresses, bartenders, right? All these people that we took for granted, but a huge number of American people are hopefully going to get their jobs back. So I can see the news report coming up in the future. It'll be for Fox, it'll say more jobs created this month than ever in history. Unemployment rate slashed in half from 20% to 10%, whereas the anti-Trump will say, leftist news media will say, unemployment's still hovering at record highs. It's just like, when is the day going to come when these news medias will just report honestly on what's happening and really present news to the best interest of the American people? Well, it's not, because it's a business. We know that. But it'll be, as I say, this is unprecedented times for us. And personally, I think we overreacted to this pandemic. I don't know if Sweden went exactly the right way, but obviously they had the kindergartners and the primary school kids, going to school. I think they kept the college kids home, the ones that could work on the computers. They tried to protect the old people. They've had 10 times the number of deaths as Denmark and Finland, I guess, or so Denmark and Norway, excuse me. But on the other hand, they're saying that they'll be much better prepared in the future, if this comes back in September and October, which many people are predicting, because they'll have a little bit of herd immunity. And by the way, lots of reports are now coming up that that's the common sense approach to this. You don't want to see tens and hundreds of thousands of people die, but this is a large country. I was thinking the other day, if we had 350, let's say 3.5 million people die in this country, it would be 1%. Is that right? Yes. There's 35 million, it would be 10%. You hate to talk about those numbers, but I saw also that, for instance, that 92% of the deaths in Europe were tied to long-term care facilities. Excuse me, 92% were people over 70 with underlying conditions. I think every person in America over 70 has an underlying condition, but 50% of the deaths were tied to long-term care facilities in Europe. So it was obvious, like, that's the people you need to protect. And the rest of us probably, and I'm in that, I'm a smoker, and I'm approaching 60, so I would be considered in that at threat age group. Of course, I still have an 85 to 90% chance of surviving if I got it. So it's some tough calls for people to make, for the leaders of the world to make. I do know that at some point in time, you can't quarantine healthy people forever, and you can't make decisions for the old and infirm to the detriment of 20 to 23-year-old, 25-year-old people with 2 kids and a wife to take care of and have their lives destroyed. I saw a report that said that when asked what was the most traumatic part of your life, looking back on it, you would have thought it would have been the loss of a loved one, but it wasn't. The most traumatic event in most people's lives is the loss of a job and their inability to feed their families, obviously, and pay their mortgages. So fear, man. I see these people out in the streets now. I see Michigan is practically uprising against this whole thing. Boston, they had a massive protest. They're going to have to put people back to work. I know that 30 states are opening, and some of these states are opening up against the guidelines where they have to have a decrease of X number of deaths, right? I think Virginia is still rising.
Well, even here in Maryland, the governor announced Friday that the beaches and everything and the parks and everything were going to stay closed at least through the end of May. And the mayor of Ocean City made a proclamation that he was opening up the beaches that day.
It seems to me one of the safer places to be, right? You got some sun, you got some fresh air, you got a heavy sea breeze. We know that these viruses don't really like fresh air. Yeah. And if you're not, and listen, some of these kids, they're going to have to learn a little bit. But I saw the idea that, and again, so much conflicting information. I saw in a related story that if you're in an airliner, and how they know this, I don't know. But they said the report claimed that if you were in an airliner and a person had this illness, this COVID-19, and you were one row behind them or one row in front of them or 1 or 2 seats to either side, you had a 90% chance that you could get it. But if you were 2 rows back or 4 seats over or 2 rows in front, it dropped to 1%. That brings me to the social distancing at the beach. I mean, isn't that a great place to be, in the salt water and to get some heavy breezes there and some heat? It doesn't like heat, So like, okay, just don't pack them in. We have learned a few things here. We should have learned this many years ago. And that's that, first of all, influenza and these types of viruses can be dangerous. And again, people are going to write me letters to say the viruses aren't dangerous and there's no such thing as COVID-19. And I'm not a doctor, so I'm just going to say what I think. But that they will be the exact place you'd want to be, out in the open air, out in the park, out on the beach, swallowing a little bit of salt water, right? Although it's probably not as healthy as it used to be. But it seems to me that's where you want to be. And then the idea that you're locked in your house, breathing the same air. And then also there's the reports that if you have this virus and you're wearing this mask, that breathing over and over again the bad air coming through the mask or whatever, that it's even worse for you. But again, I have no clue. I just saw a great long lecture from a gal who was a adversary, we'll say, of Dr. Fauci, because she had met him and he had threatened her to get the research they were working on. She was a research assistant. Her boss was out of town and he was going to come over and fire her. And he has a very great interest in vaccinations. The thing that scares me is like, what's coming next? That's why Bill Gates scares me. Bill Gates really isn't a doctor. I don't know if he knows that much about health. I know that he gives 10%. Now he's the largest donator, right? 10% of the total budget of the WHO comes from this guy. And they have on multiple occasions, I don't know how many and what were the subjects. The WHO had bowed to his wishes on certain issues to do things his way.
Well, he owns he makes more money owning pharmaceutical companies producing vaccines than he makes even owning Microsoft and producing computer software.
Right. So one of the scariest things I heard him say was, we can't get back to normal until we have a vaccine. And then the idea that we're going to be asked to take, and listen, I'm up and down on vaccines too. I used to think they worked. I had when I was a kid, I had red measles, I had German measles, I had the mumps, I had just about everything, right? And then all of a sudden, well, my kids didn't get any of that stuff, but I guess it was gone. But I didn't want them getting all these shots at the same time. So at the very least, we turned down some of them, but also separated the shots so they weren't getting these like cocktails stuffed in them all at one time. And I also had them wait until they're a little bit older because I understand something about the boys, particularly the myelin sheath around in the brain or whatever it is around some of these cells. Again, I'm no expert, obviously. It takes a little more time than girls to develop, so you got to be careful about that. I understand that there is some evidence that a certain percentage of people do have terrible reactions to the vaccines, as we all know. But what scared me was that you would be forced to have this vaccine, and if not forced to have the vaccine, that you might not be able to get on a plane, not be able to travel unless you have this ID. So him saying that life cannot be normal unless we get a vaccine, that's a scary thing, man. Because once you get people to have drugs stuck in their body, forced to do so, I mean, the ultimate violation to some degree medically, then it's a scary thing if they're going to punish you not to do it. And so I even saw people saying, for instance, you've seen these doctors that have been censored off of YouTube, and maybe they're right or wrong. They had 5 million views. They said this is the wrong approach. Well, they've come under attack because they had their own string of urgent care facilities, blah, blah, blah. I don't think they were doing it for profit. But the point was, you can't censor these ideas. You can't censor this. We need to make up our own mind about it. Now, if somebody's saying something stupid, I still don't know if they should be censored. They should just not be listened to. It's so funny how the tech industry has also gotten them, and they also probably have their hand in the pharmaceutical pie, but how they are censoring all these, they're the arbiter of truth. They're censoring all these ideas about how to treat the virus if it doesn't agree with, say, what the WHO says or what our own doctors here in town. So you got little twerps like Mark Zuckerberg and billionaires like Gates and Bezos making decisions for us simply because they have so much money. It's a scary thing that money doesn't necessarily make you smart. And money certainly doesn't make you a medical expert. But one of the comments was, I think this was in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, was saying that they believe that the way China handles the internet is the model to use for the United States. In other words, censor anything that's not, quote unquote, the truth. Who figures out what the truth is? Well, that's them. Or maybe they have higher placed or a little bit more learned people than Mark Zuckerberg. But the idea that Zuckerberg is denying people on Facebook information about this virus that may very well turn out to be valid, because still nobody knows, and we're not going to know for another year exactly who was right. And I go back to Sweden. Was it Sweden or Denmark? Denmark went to the lockdowns. Denmark's only had 350 deaths. Sweden didn't do the lockdowns. They got 3,000 deaths. But next spring, we're going to find out whether this herd immunity idea takes effect and whether everybody in Denmark who wanders out gets the virus, right? and they have to shut down their economies again. Well, they're not going to have to do that in Sweden because they say that they may be actually approaching herd immunity right now. And this is a valid approach. But for me to come up and maybe give a lecture and put that on Facebook or even YouTube, right, I might be taken down and punished for that. So again, it's just a weird, complicated, interconnected situation where everybody seems to be taking advantage of their own version of the chaos to line their own pockets or censor other topics or points of view that they don't want out there. It's really kind of scary what we've seen here. The only good thing I can say is, and I don't know whether I agree with their approach to, because I don't know enough about not wearing masks and all this stuff, although I haven't worn a mask yet. And I was the only person at the post office the other day without one besides the lady behind the counter. But the protesters there, it's nice to see that, remember, the Constitution hadn't been suspended just because there's been a virus. We've been through a lot of stuff before. We saw when it was during the Civil War, right? That's when Lincoln went nuts with his dictatorship. And so it's nice to see that at least the American public is out exercising their constitutional rights to protest the policies, to say we want to get back to work, to say we have to get back to work, to say that we don't want to lose everything that we've worked for our entire lives because I'm healthy. We won't know the truth about any of this, and if we ever do, who knows? Because obviously the news media is the group that's been chosen to give us the most of the information about this, and what didn't go along with whatever accepted line has been censored off of as many platforms as they could possibly get it off of. I don't know if I trust Dr. Fauci. He looks like a little weasel to me.
Well, we've only been calling it fake news for however many years now, and now we're supposed to believe everything they tell us.
Well, that's funny. You should say that, because a lot of people called me up and said, "Man, that Trump, I didn't think they were Democrats." And they said they were starting to like Trump because they listened to the Democratic debates, and all the Democrats wanted to talk about was illegal immigrants. They never talked about us, And now they're going, "Well, he looks so bad here, and they said this and they said that about him, and his response was this." And I'm like, wait a second. We've now proven for the last 4 years that everything they've said about him, and by the way, you and I tend to agree, right, that Trump isn't perfect. He has a lot of flaws. It's just really the alternatives at this point in time are worse than ever before. But I said, well, just stop and think. For 4 years now, we've heard about Russian collusion. That's all been disproven. Yet they still have that on Facebook and haven't taken it down as fake news. We found out Papadopoulos, right, the Greek fellow who was one of Trump's, I guess, minor advisors, was set up. They sent in FBI informants. One of his friends turned FBI informant to try to get him to talk about Russian collusion. He kept denying it again and again. We found out that they set up General Flynn, a 3-star general, right? 3 stars? If they set this guy up as bad as they say they did, what chance do we have? So we know Comey's a liar. We know McCabe is a liar. We're not so sure about this guy Wright, and that his name is running the FBI now. They've been totally discredited. We think Hillary Clinton knew about it. We think Barack Obama administration knew about it. But all of a sudden, you're going to believe what the news media is saying about Trump's response to the virus? Stop and think. And stop and think who might take this country over if Trump loses in November. Kamala Harris, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, Schiff, Schumer, Nadler, Pelosi, Cory Booker. Need I go any further? Joe Biden. Come on. That's scarier than the COVID, man.
Extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States. The things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative, independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that,
AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed by the big money-controlled media monopoly. And that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
Of course, we're talking about conspiracies and all of this. I find it interesting that you chose for the first article in the magazine an article on Horatio Kitchener, essentially conspiracy servant and victim.
Oh, that's an interesting article, and it was based upon information from a book called Prolonging the Agony, of how the bankers and industrialists, arms makers, prolonged World War I by years and years to profit more. Obviously also to completely destroy Germany, written by Mark Rowland. That's a very interesting article. Kitchener was famous as the fellow who did the "We Want You" poster, right? And he got millions of young Brits to sign up for the war. Of course, we based our own "Uncle Sam Wants You" poster off the famous Kitchener poster. And Kitchener was a alleged war hero. Kitchener made most of his fame by gunning down poorly armed North African Berbers and Arabs and others in Egypt and Sudan, right? And he was the hero of the Sudan, I believe. So they used him for that. But the minute he started to talking about the possible truth of these wars, that there might take many more years to win the war and that it might cost millions of lives, well, they were pretty much done with him. That wasn't really the thrust of the article necessarily, but at the end there was a discussion of whether Kitchener was put on a pathetic little ship, and then he should have, for the position he had at the time, it should have been a heavily guarded ship with a convoy most likely. But he was put out in this used up old destroyer or something, and then ended up sunk off the coast. And those few people one of the shore patrols who went out to try to rescue him were going to launch boats to go see if they could help, were told that they couldn't do it. So there is some question as to whether Lord Kitchener was hung out to dry there or purposely killed to shut him up so people wouldn't know the truth about the carnage that was probably going to come about.
And then the next article was the Heroes of the Alamo article, and you have a picture there of the man who is probably the poster child for term limits, of course. Santa Anna having served a total of 12 terms as president of Mexico.
Yeah, listen, I mean, there's always things you learn in these articles that you didn't know, and I knew Santa Anna was powerful, but I didn't realize what a central figure he was for so long in Mexican politics. And what'd you say, 12 terms, right? As president, not consecutive, but he did serve a total of that. And he was evidently, a brutal guy. And you look at how he treated those who surrendered or survived, and what he did with asking that the bodies of those inside the Alamo be burned. And to Catholics, that's a way of, I guess, denying them. Cremation is not something they support. And just in general, it was a great story, though, by Chuck Baldwin, Pastor Baldwin. People ought to check him out at chuckbaldwinlive.com. And he just basically talked about the fact that people today just don't quite understand the sacrifices that people were willing to make back then for freedom. And it also was a good short story on the history of the battle. But he also, at the end, of course, brought in other great, just mentioned in his conclusion about the other great people who are willing to die for freedom, William Wallace, the people at Lexington and Concord. We've kind of lost this idea that there's something that there's something worth dying for. So, you know, it's kind of a tie-in to these people that are protesting the COVID lockdowns. And again, I don't know whether they're right or wrong, but I do know that they are making their voices heard pretty loudly, and so that is a good thing.
Well, shouldn't we always err on the side of freedom? And if that's the case, shouldn't we support these people, whether they are right or wrong?
I think so. You know, it's tough, though, because if a certain number of people die, whether they be old and infirm or not, it's just a horrible thing to see these death tolls go up. But on the other hand, the toll of poverty on families, I mean, people always say, do you want to see a lot of people die? Well, no. But do I want to see a lot of people lose their homes? Do I want to see a lot of children never be able to go to college? Do I want to see the U.S. economy wrecked forever? Do I want to see a fertile ground for the message of, say, a Bernie Sanders who wants to give everything away for free and turn this into a socialist country? And socialism by itself can be a decent form of government, I suppose. I mean, we've seen National Socialism. We've seen socialist countries in Europe. But remember what Marx said. Marx said that socialism was a transitional form of government between capitalism and communism. So, you know, when you have a large number of disaffected people and in poverty, it's certainly a group where your message of pushing away from capitalist freedom to socialism, gift giving, and welfare state is more palatable. I think we should always err on the side of freedom, because that's the Constitution. As I said, the Constitution has not been suspended, and we have been through many things: World War II, World War I, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and rioting in the streets after King was killed, and the William Ayres. You know, the only guy besides Roosevelt who locked up a bunch was Lincoln and Roosevelt. Those two right there. There was probably no need for Roosevelt to be locking up war protesters at the time. They weren't threatening to terrorize the nation. And neither are these people. They just want to pay their bills.
Well, you know, you talk about suspending the Constitution. Last week on the program, I don't know if you got a chance to listen to it or not, Judge Andrew Napolitano was talking about the Founding Fathers, and, George Washington is looking at, I believe it was Thomas Jefferson or maybe James Madison, when they were signing the Constitution in 1789. And he says, but of course, if a bunch of people start getting sick, none of this is going to matter anymore, right?
And it reminds me of the picture of the man, another meme they did at the Last Supper with three the police state looking cops put into the Last Supper saying, you're not social distancing. No gatherings of more than 10 or more. But it is serious.
I'll say my favorite one was, and I used it one week in my newsletter, it was the Lord sitting at the Lord's Supper table, and at the Last Supper table, and it was Da Vinci's, painting, only you just have Jesus in the middle and none of the apostles. It's an empty table. And then across the top, like a Zoom feed, you have a picture of each of the apostles.
Oh, I got you.
And yeah. Jesus is sitting in the middle of the table. He's like, okay, Judas, are you on?
Oh, that is funny. But it brings up a good point, and that is, honestly, I think if the American people had laid down like sheep, this thing would be going on. And I do think it's the best interest and we always try to be nonpartisan, but honestly, we haven't been very partisan in this discussion, nor have I been very partisan over the past 4 years, simply because I've seen the news coverage of just conservatives in general. We've also seen the vilification of nationalists, white nationalists, and nationalists in general. And I find it appalling. It's not that the Fox News, for instance, is particularly honest. They're over the top as well. But when I look at the coverage, I'm simply appalled that it's so self-serving and so pro-liberal. And so I should say leftist, really, because liberals have their hearts in the right places. But this whole push, you notice one of the more reasonable voices in this whole thing has been Ocasio-Cortez, right? Well, she sees an opportunity here. But anyway, back to our other discussion.
Welcome to the Christendom curriculum. You know, every parent who decides to homeschool wants to secure a great education for their child, while also saving time and money. But these days, many parents have another concern. They also want a homeschool curriculum without all the multiculturalist, politically correct diversity doctrine that's really little more than a thin disguise for an anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-Western civilization bias. Now there is such a curriculum. The Christendom curriculum gives your children a complete education in Bible, history, literature, and more, focusing on the classic academic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But we also tell the story of Christendom, the story of the Christian nations, especially as Christ's kingdom has been historically manifest in the nations of Europe and America, and we do so without apology. The Christendom curriculum is the only Christian nationalist homeschool program you'll find. We support the right of the European and American peoples to their historic Christian cultures against the globalist leftists who want to destroy those cultures. Not only that, but we provide assigned reading courses for various hot-button subjects in our current culture wars, including feminism, social justice, and cultural Marxism, among others. These reading courses will teach your kids how to survive a social justice warrior attack, how to debate with leftists on social media, how to reform their local churches and communities, and more. We're living in a time of tremendous historical and social change. Christians have the opportunity now to begin building the culture and civilization of the next 1,000 years and beyond. It's an exciting time to be alive. So if you want to help raise the next generation of culture warriors, if you want your children to grow up with a love for Christ's kingdom and for their own nation, while at the same time learning how to defend America and rebuild the West, the easy-to-use Christendom curriculum is for you. Click the Learn More button to get in on the action. And thanks for listening.
Of course, suspending the Constitution, there was a man who I would assume felt he had the right to do it back in 1859. He was a South African man, and his name was Joshua Norton, and he comes to California and declares himself to be the Emperor of the United States. And John Tiffany wrote an article about that on page 20.
Yeah, once in a while, we like to have something a little short and lighthearted in the Barnes Review. It's always a lot of very serious stuff, but the story of Joshua Norton is just interesting. He came over from South Africa, as I mentioned, and I guess he had some money, and he was going to make a fortune, and he bet on rice coming in, and he was told that the rice wasn't coming in, and there was going to be a shortage, and he bought up all the rice and was planning on selling it for a profit, and then all of a sudden boatload after boatload of rice came in, and he ended up becoming a homeless, I guess, and he may have been a little bit mentally unstable, but the people of San Francisco kind of adopted him as he was a crackpot, but he had some good ideas. He did declare himself Emperor of the United States, and also he was the protector of Mexico. He said he saw what was going on. But if you look at what he was suggesting, he wanted a bridge to be made, which ended up being the Golden Gate Bridge. He was I'm looking at the list of things he did here. He decreed that representatives of the different states were to assemble at Plant's Music Hall to change laws to ameliorate the evils under which the country was laboring. He wanted to dissolve the United States of America. This was in 1860, so he probably had the right idea there. He didn't want Congress to meet in Washington, D.C., which they're not doing now. I guess they just started again. He had his own money printed up and it was accepted in some places. I don't know how he afforded this. And so he was basically the city's mascot. You have to look at the list here and get that issue of the May-June 2020 issue of the Barnes Review. It's an amusing article, but it is amazing that we see that people we think are nuts, and believe me, he may have been more sane than we thought, that have some pretty good ideas. And maybe the people of San Francisco recognize that some of his ideas were a little more common sense than the people running their country. So he wanted a Bible convention held in San Francisco, for instance. He was a pro-Christian. And but they ended up doing a play about him. I think it was called The Golden Demon or The Gold Demon. But an interesting little article and someone I'd never heard about before. And again, he was his cemetery when he died in 1880. He had a massive funeral, and it says here the funeral cortege was 2 miles long, and 10,000 people turned out for this guy's funeral. So in the end, in 1980, San Francisco marked his 100th anniversary of his death with a lunch hour ceremonies at Market Montgomery Street. So, hey, listen, sometimes the nuttier you are, the better your ideas truly are. You're only considered nutty because the ideas you have are not what the ruling class says is what we're supposed to be thinking.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Contact your local, state, and national elected politicians and tell them that you will not tolerate these attacks on our heritage. You can also visit scv.org, download an application to join us in our fight to preserve our Southern heritage. Visit scv.org today. If you don't have a Confederate ancestor and you are tired of American history disappearing, you can assist us by becoming a friend of the SCV. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
Antonius J. Patrick, which of course is a pen name for someone there in Washington, D.C., who's, obviously he writes under a pen name for reasons. But he had wrote about Francis McCullough, who was basically an Irish journalist who went around the world, Mexico, Russia, different places, to report on the persecution of Catholics in those countries. And he wound up becoming a prisoner of the Bolsheviks when he was there trying to get the story on the Bolshevik persecution of Catholics.
Yeah, that's a nice, long, very detailed, accurate story. McCullough was quite a guy. He was also an Irish Fusilier. And so when he went to report, he did quite a bit of investigation, by the way, into the assassination of the Tsar and this type of stuff, hung around with the White Russians. And if you look at some of his statements about Bolshevism particularly, and the persecution of Christianity, he was well ahead of the curve. He saw it firsthand, what was happening, and he realized that this was a twisted regime, the Bolsheviks in general. But I remember he says here, he commented, he had written several books. One of them was called Prisoner of the Reds, which he detailed his incarceration, and he was able to talk his way out of it somehow and not be killed, because he might have been killed as a spy, or if they found out he was associated with the British military. But he says in his book, The Bolshevik Persecution of Christianity, he says, and it reminds me of today, by the way, nor can I ever forget the masses I have heard on dark, frosty mornings in isolated Catholic churches far in the heart of Red Russia, and how astonishingly the calm and dignity of the noble service contrasted with the mad roar of revolution outside. The church was dark, save where the altar candles made the silvery hair of the priest shine like a nimbus and light up the altar, evoking a picture of the same sacrifice being offered in a dimly lit Roman catacomb in commemoration of Sebastian the soldier, or of Agnes the Virgin martyr, while tyranny, as bad as Lenin's, howled itself hoarse outside. It kind of reminded me of an Antifa rally, right? But he goes on, very great article, great writer, all well sourced, lots of quotes from the book. Again, The Prisoner of the Reds. But he also went to Mexico, And so I didn't really realize this, I should have, how bad Mexico had become in certain parts of its history as far as its advance towards communism and their persecution of Catholics. And of course, there's one famous Padre Father Pro or Padre Pro, who was killed, and many others were killed. So it actually has spurred an article coming for our July-August issue on the period in Mexican history in which communism had advanced to the point where it was becoming quite a power, and infiltrated some portions of the regime. And by the way, the guy's name was Jose Ramon Miguel Agustin Pro, Juarez, as the blessed Miguel Pro. So anyway, that's a very interesting article that will be spun out of this one. McCullough got to interview a lot of people. He never really interviewed Lenin, but he had been close enough to Lenin and knew enough people to be able to talk to them about their impressions of him. He was able to interview Trotsky. Trotsky thought was amazingly intelligent, versatile person, brutal, but how easily Trotsky could fit in with the roaring masses, the unsophisticated, but at the same time multilingual, be able to turn around and converse with the upper crust in French at soirees and other things. And he had some very candid comments about Trotsky and others. He got to also interview Yurovsky, who he had a very negative opinion on. So that's one you'll have to read there. Lots of great quotes from McCullough. Quite a guy. I didn't know much about him, except that he had been a prisoner of the Bolshevik regime for some time, and that he had been right in the middle of some of the biggest communist uprisings in history and been able to report on them firsthand.
That is a good stopping place, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to end the conversation here for this week's TBR Radio Presents, the TBR History Hour. But come back, same time, same place next week, and Paul Angel will again be our guest, and we are going to discuss the second half of the May-June issue of the Barnes Review magazine, and it was a great one. And we're going to discuss the remaining articles in the issue, and we'll also talk about some other things as well in our conversation. If you just happen to be watching this on YouTube as opposed to listening on conventional radio, please click like and subscribe, because by doing so you help our channel out tremendously, and you'll also get notifications when we put up a new weekly episode of the show. Go to www.barnesreview.org, www.barnesreview.org, and find out about the Barnes Review magazine. If you're not already a subscriber, you can do so at that website. You can also find out about this May-June issue of the Barnes Review magazine, and more importantly, how you can get your hands on a copy of this great issue. Another thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to the TBR bookstore. And we've come out with a lot of new books in the last few months, and you'll want to check those out as well. I know all of us here at TBR Magazine, we love what we do. And that is, of course, bringing history to you and bringing history into accord with the facts as we do so. That, of course, was the mantra of the late Dr. Harry Elmer Barnes, for whom our magazine is named. And this pandemic has given us more time, for some of us, more time to do that. And so there was just so much that went into this issue, so much research. And just the quality of that research and the quality of the writing. It's always good with TBR. But if you were to look at this last issue, you'd say, wow, they really kicked it up a notch. And the reason why is because some of our writers have had more time with this pandemic, because they're not distracted by all of the other things that would ordinarily distract them. And so again, you'll just want to check out this great issue of the magazine. You can also, at the Barnes Review website, barnesreview.org, you can check out the radio archives. And so if you're new to TBR Radio, you can go to barnesreview.org, click the radio tab, and you can just go down and listen to back episodes of this show and my other show as well, TBR Radio presents the Dixie Heritage Show, and before that, TBR Radio presents the Dixie Heritage Hour. We also have some other podcasts and radio broadcasts going deeper back into the archives, not only by myself, but by Andrew Harrington Hitchcock, and also by Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson, who may very well be the foremost expert in America on all things Russian today. So you'll definitely want to go to thebarnesreview.org. Anyways, we are running out of time now. So from all of us here at TBR Radio, God bless. Same bat time, same bat channel next week.